Welcome to Simmons Says, where I help emerging and struggling writers create intriguing plots and compelling characters to make their stories hard to put down and even harder to forget. We're in Liverpool. It's 1931, and Mr. William Herbert Wallace receives word at his chess club about a telephone message, right? It's supposedly from somebody named R.M. Qualthrow. And the message is he's told to visit Mr. Qualthrow at Menlove Gardens East the following evening. Now, Mr. Herbert Wallace goes. And he gets there. And it appears the address doesn't exist. He's a little miffed, returns home, goes into the house. And his wife, Julia, has been brutally murdered. He finds her dead. There's no obvious murder weapon, no apparent signs of forced entry. This actually happened. And why am I telling you about this? Well, welcome to another episode of Simmons Says, where I attempt to help you find out what happens next in your stories. And in this particular case, we are exploring or continuing to explore my methodology called mystery mechanics, because I love mysteries. Now, tell me, the story that I just relayed to you, this information, tell me which of those things that I mentioned were the clues for figuring out what happened. By whom? Which ones? Some of you are probably mulling it over, asking me to repeat things and stuff like that. But yeah, you can roll the tape back. But let me give you the answer right now, in case some of you have already made notes. All of them, everything I said is a clue. Every one of them that I shared raises another question. Each clue gets you, the audience or the sleuth, to ask another question. And each question builds on the next and the next. And that's what this episode is about. We're going to use the Wallace case as a laboratory to explore how to generate and lay out or plant clues to your mystery stories. Now, again, I mentioned that this was a real case. This is a factual case, background. So let me give you some background. Mr. Wallace was an insurance agent in Liverpool, England, right? And again, we're talking about January 9th, 1931. And a telephone message was left for him at his chess club, and one particular evening. And the caller gave the name R.M. Qualthrow and asked Mr. Wallace to call on him the next evening at an address in Menlo Gardens East. Very specific. So Wallace, being, an insurance agent and wanting to sell a policy, right? He goes looking for it the following evening. And there was a Menlo Gardens East. It was an area, absolutely. But that address, that particular address given, did not exist. So, I mean, obviously, Wallace is frustrated and everything. He can't find it and then finds out it doesn't exist. Is this a bad joke or whatever? Gets home, and his wife is dead. His wife, Julia, is dead. Right? And again, she's been murdered. So suspicion eventually falls on Wallace himself. Why? Good question. Let's go a step further. He was convicted. That's right, convicted of the crime. But the conviction was overturned on appeal. Now, why? You might ask about that. Again, make notes, okay? The important point is we're not going to solve the case. This is not about, let's figure out who actually killed her or if he actually did it. No, that's not the case. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to use this case to look at how clues work within a mystery story. Okay, so here we go. Your first clue is someone called Wallace at his chess club that evening, the first evening, right? And the caller wanted Wallace to go to a specific address at a specific time. And the caller left a name to add some validity to the request, R.M. Qualtrough. And the address turns out to be a non-existent address. So the questions that you might hear stirring around in your head is, who made the call? Who made the actual call? Why send Wallace away from home? And was the purpose to create an alibi or to get Wallace out of the way? Was it intended to clear the house so that someone else could come there? How did the caller know that Wallace would actually get the message and act on it? What made that caller say, here's the circumstances, this man is going to follow through? Why the name he used? Is there some possible information there, clue there that we could build on? And why that particular location? Was it the distance from his house to this location that, was there a specific amount of time that the killer, the actual killer, knew Wallace would have to take to get from point A to point B and then back? Was that important? Is that why that distance, that particular address was chosen? So if the call itself was legitimate, it multiplies the possibilities. Now, let's look at it this way. We can look at it as, is Wallace really guilty and did he set up an alibi, or is he actually innocent? So let's look at it as if he's innocent for a moment. So Wallace spends some time driving all the way to this place and then looking for this fictitious address, this Men Love Gardens East. He's going to ask some people, maybe if he can find, he's going to ask people for directions. Do they know where such and such is? This establishes that he really did go on this journey. Okay, so let's assume that did happen. There were people who said, yeah, I remember this guy driving up here and doing this, right? Okay. Once again, you're asking, was that false address meant to keep Wallace away, right, for a predictable amount of time? And if so, how much time did the killer actually need? Had the killer worked that out already, which means it's premeditated? Did the caller know Liverpool well enough to create an address that sounded plausible? Why choose somewhere so difficult and, enough to occupy Wallace's time, but believable enough that Wallace would actually go? Well, I think that's obvious. If he really wanted Wallace to go, if he really felt that this location would make Wallace salivate. And let's remember what Wallace does. He's an insurance agent. He sells insurance. So something about maybe that area is full of people with money or families and whatever, but something that would attract an insurance agent, a man looking to sell policies. Does Wallace's public search, again, assuming that he went, that people saw him, does his public search support his innocence? Or could it be that he set all that up and he met and talked to some people because he was really establishing an alibi? Yeah, people saw me there. So see, what I'm telling you, police officers, is the truth. I couldn't have killed my wife because I was all the way across town doing this. It's a good question, good set of questions. And again, each clue, as you look at it, ask another question or even another set of questions. The same clue can support two total competing possibilities. And this is good. This gets your audience going. Well, what do you think? What do I think? Especially if they're really engaged in the story, it gets the juices flowing and they keep turning the pages or they keep watching the film or the TV show, whatever. Okay. Now let's look at another part of this case. There's no forced entry. So did Julia, the wife, know her killer? Again, no forced entry that was shown, was seen, was detected. So that must mean she let the person in. Or the person picked the lock or somehow snuck in. But either way, they didn't have to bash, they didn't have to kick, they didn't have to pry, there's no marks left on the door jamb or anything like that. So the suspicion is that Julia knew the person she let in. Julia knew the killer. Was it the killer someone connected with William, her husband? Could someone have entered through an unsecured door? Was the scene staged to look like someone had been admitted willingly? And if Wallace was the killer, does forced entry become irrelevant? If someone else killed her, how did they gain access without raising any alarms? And I don't mean alarms set on the doors. In 1931, there probably wouldn't have been that kind of a security system on a house or an apartment. But if they were forcing and she was screaming and everything, that would have raised the neighbors. Quiet, no signs of forced entry. No one heard any screams or anything like that. So did her husband kill her and do it so efficiently and effectively that she didn't have a chance? Was the visitor someone that she knew? And again, they struck unexpectedly? Questions that you, as the writer, are planting within the story to keep your audience engaged and chewing on these bits and pieces, trying to figure this thing out. Physical circumstances create character questions. A locked door isn't merely a locked door. It asks who could get through it. A victim who apparently admitted someone asks, who would she trust? And suddenly your clues begin to build some sort of a picture of a suspect pool. People that she trusts. Who are those people in this story? Aside from her husband, was she involved with somebody else? Was he involved with somebody else? You start to get bits and pieces, putting them together, trying to fit them like a puzzle, trying to see which pieces fit with the other piece. Now, let's look at another aspect. Julia was killed, but no definitive weapon was found on the premises. Now, it's 1931. They do have forensics to a certain extent, but not like you're going to see on CSI. So they will definitely look at the wound and try and figure out what kind of instrument or weapon caused that wound. But no weapon was found on the premises. So did the killer bring the weapon? Does that suggest premeditation? Was it something that the killer grabbed or the visitor grabbed in the house and then removed it? In which case, why? If they grabbed a fireplace poker or something like that and struck her with it, why take it away? And you might say, well, fingerprints, wipe them off. Don't want to take a chance on that? Okay, you might remove it. Was it carried out because it could identify the killer? Was it something that was a gift that a particular person had given to her and had been left behind? It would have raised questions. Could investigators simply have failed to recognize the weapon? And I'm going to refer you to, if you haven't already, a short story by Roald Dahl. And I'll throw his name in there somewhere in the comments section below, right? But Roald Dahl wrote a short story, brilliant short story called Lamb to the Slaughter. Read that. Think about this. Could the detective not have recognized the weapon? Read that story. That's all I'm going to say about it. Anyway, what does the nature of the wound tell us about the kind of object? As I was saying earlier, something's missing. Why is it missing? Figure it out. That's a clue. Missing object, missing photograph, missing weapon. Witnesses, no witnesses. Why didn't anybody hear the struggle? Or did she scream? Why did no one hear that? Now, she wasn't shot, so they wouldn't have heard a gunshot. But again, no one heard anything. The missing time. How much time did the attacker take to do the dirty deed and then leave? Leaving the house in such a way that when Mr. Wallace came home, he didn't notice anything until he went in and saw his wife dead on the floor. So let's look at the facts again. Wallace has been traveling to find a non-existent address, which he may or may not have known was the case. Julia was murdered in a certain window of time, that window of time that he was away. Therefore, the question becomes whether Wallace had sufficient time to commit the crime and still go in and set up his alibi, or whether someone else acted while he was away? Or is there a third option? And I can think of one. These are your questions. And here's another great teaching point. A timeline isn't an answer either. The timeline by itself is not. It's a test. You use it to help test the theories you're coming up with based on the other clues. If you think Wallace did it, does the time that we're working with permit him to do that? And how did he set up the phone call the evening before? We would look at that. If you don't think he did it, then you're going to look at suspects and where were they within the time frame that the crime took place. So that's how you use time to test your theories. Now, you have the mysterious phone call, you have a non-existent address, you have Wallace's journey, you have no obvious forced entry, missing murder weapon, and time of the killing. What happens when we stop looking at each of these separately? We start to put them together. We start to bounce things off of each other. We start to try and answer some of the questions. And that eventually leads us to a deduction, right? But again, I'm not trying to solve the murder of Julia Wallace. That's not the point of this exercise. It's the point of this exercise was to get you to take a look at how clues work in your story. And you want to look at that and say, okay, as I lay out the clues of my story, right, whatever you're writing, what does it make my detective, my sleuth, ask, depending on what kind of detective it is? Amateur, professional, private? Is it an innocent person trying to prove themselves? Whatever. What questions come up that cause them to have to ask new questions and then seek the answers? So let's look at it this way. Remember, the clues build on each other, right? The solution emerges when enough answers begin to fit together. So if you're only going to do 3 clues, then okay, 1, 2, third one, oh, put these 3 together, boom. If you need more clues or you have more clues, then again, each clue is going to force the detective to look further, to ask and answer another question. And once the question finally stops multiplying and starts pointing towards your answer, your final answer, that's when you will begin to set up your denouement, the climax of your story. Now, if you come at writing your mystery story the way we just did this, where we got this great crime and we're figuring out, okay, so this guy is accused of this and his wife was murdered and he did this and could he have done that? And these things happened just before. Okay, you got all those wonderful pieces. And you could begin to try and figure out, okay, what clues do I lay out and how did the people react and how do I figure out who's a suspect? You could go that route. Or you could take my advice and first write the crime. Figure out how the crime is done. And then you'd know what clues to supply and where best to plant them. You would have an idea of what suspects, what red herrings, what distractions, what information, all of those things would start to come to you a little easier because you actually know who did it, how they did it, why they did it. And you can build off of that. So yeah, you can go the other way or you can go this way. Guess which one I would suggest? Be with me next time when we talk about the power of selecting proper suspect. And also, we'll figure out what happens next in your mystery story. Take care.